Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Sonic the Hedgehog 3, sort of. The last time we touched this game, we finished off Sonic's campaign, and now we're actually in a ROM hack, Sonic 3 Complete, to tackle the Knuckles campaign. And this is actually a pretty interesting ROM hack, and that brings basically everything Sonic 3 together. Sonic 3 Knuckles, Sonic 3 Part 1, as well as Knuckles separately, as well as, I believe, every Blue Sphere stage. And the interesting thing is that this hack has its own options thing. For instance, you can choose what game loads immediately upon startup. You have specific gameplay options, like you can play the zones as they were originally ordered in the level select and such, level designs even. Added difficulties from Sonic Jam, as well as different layouts slightly for the areas. A unique control option for the super modes. Even some minor music things, like fading for act results and such. There's a lot of work that's in this hack, and it's actually one of my preferred ways to play Sonic 3 on the whole. Particularly because they end up bringing back some musical tracks in a really good way. So for that, let's head right on into Sonic 3 and Knuckles, so we can tackle the main reason we're here and play the game as Knuckles. And admittedly, one of the more minor changes, but one of my favorites, actually comes really quickly in. So let's just head on over to File Select and get Knuckles started on up. So we're in Angel Island, pretty set, pretty basic. Act 1's basically completely unchanged as Knuckles when you're playing as him. In fact, I'm even going for the same special rings right off the bat, because special stages are still here, and there is, of course, going to be a Super Knuckles. But the biggest, the immediate change I was talking about is actually that cutscene we saw just there. In the original Sonic 3 and K, as Sonic fans would probably recognize, that cutscene takes place in Mushroom Hill Zone, over half the game away from here. However, the game still loads you into Angel Island as your first zone, meaning Knuckles went the wrong direction and had to make a gigantic U-turn. For the sake of story consistency, they actually changed that cutscene's location here in Angel Island, and you know what? I like that. Now, these special stages in the game are completely unchanged. However, one change, if I recall correctly, from the original LP, I think I did this, is that in the original LP, I got perfects on every single special stage. Not so much here. Just because I want to move on. The special stages can already eat up a lot of time to begin with. There's a reason that this first part is around a half hour long. That's just me getting special stages along the way through the first two zones. One thing that I think everyone, including myself, fell for when it came to the special stages when they first played as Knuckles, though, is that they thought they had to touch the red spheres, and that's still a failure. Blue spheres are always the things you need to collect. Though, one thing I've always found odd about Knuckles' special stage sprite, I thought the back of his head always looked a bit too boxy. Kind of like there's just a flat edge that goes straight down. Now, going into Knuckles himself, the immediate control differences are very apparent because, for instance, Tails and Sonic can jump at a set height. Knuckles jumps about either 3/4 or half that height. I want to say maybe even 2/3. And that means there's quite a few pathways he just cannot reach because his jump is not high enough. However, he makes up for that lack of jump with his glide and climb abilities. If you press the jump button again, basically do the insta-shield attack as Sonic, as Knuckles, you'll glide at a pretty decent speed. You do kind of have a descending arc in that you're always getting closer to the ground faster than you're traversing forward. At least at first, it does have some momentum to it. And you can just climb on walls by flying into them. You can move up and down them and climb them. Another immediate difference for Sonic 3 Complete is that they actually bring back the Sonic 3 standalone mini-boss music, and I absolutely love this song. It's also technically Knuckles' theme, I believe, which is cool. Or at least it was in Sonic 3 Complete. Standalone, rather. There are a couple of minor musical things like that. For instance, I think the invincibility theme we just heard a few moments ago is actually the Sonic 3 standalone one as well. And good, because honestly, even though it's more repetitive, I've always preferred the Sonic 3 standalone to the Sonic 3, the Sonic and Knuckles invincibility theme. Just a more catchy melody to me. Now, admittedly, the thing about playing this game as any of the extra characters is that with the exception of some of the Knuckles-only pathways, just because his abilities means he needs some exclusive pathways, the zones are going to be exactly the same. So in this playthrough, I'm going to be focusing more on Knuckles' abilities and the pathways within them, as well as talking about some cut content stuff. Like, for instance, speaking about special stages, there was actually an 8th special stage in the code of Sonic 3 standalone. Essentially, it was one giant pathway of a couple of blue spheres every now and then, surrounded completely by red spheres. And the interesting thing about that particular layout is that, nowadays at least, it was actually eventually reused in Sonic Mania. I don't know why it wasn't used in the game to begin with. In fact, I think it would have made a better final special stage than the actual 7th one. But it's probably just a case of maybe they thought it was too hard. Now, admittedly, as well, due to Knuckles' own jump ability, we're going to be a bit slower in getting the Chaos Emerald, just because his pathways diverge so much so quickly, even starting from the next act, that you can't get as many special rings as quickly. I think the soonest you can theoretically get it without Extreme going out of your way might be Hydrocity Act 2. For me, it's usually Marble Garden Act 1. And that is the other ability Knuckles has. He can break down rock walls without having to dash into them. And now it's time for the mini-boss, this flame-firing mini-robot. And since I don't have the flame shield, he actually gets a chance to show off his attacks this time around. Not much of one, but hey, he got a chance. He fires mines all over the place that explode, then he'll go to the top of the screen and move to the other side, come down, and repeat. Not a very complicated boss. Love that Sonic 3 standalone boss theme, though. And since we went a different pathway through Knuckles' own abilities, we're now in a different Act 2 for Angel Island. We are completely underground for this one, and there are spikes everywhere. This is a level I very much recommend taking your time on, just due to the fact that it's so cramped. Now, I'll probably mention this again later on, but something you should probably not expect from me anytime in the near future is a Tails run of the game, because whereas Knuckles gets his own routes and pathways, Tails is basically just a different way of playing the Sonic's pathways. And I don't find that nearly as interesting or worth a playthrough, even though Tails' hyper form that you get for getting all of these Super Emeralds later on is admittedly interesting, but probably not. The most I might do, perhaps, actually, if I could figure out a way to get Sonic Jam working 100%, I'm probably very close to that already, as it is with the way my system is. I could potentially show off Tails' easy mode, just due to how that layout works. I think easy mode's available as Tails for Sonic 3 and K. Jam was always an interesting concept to me, just because of being a collection very early on into gaming history comparatively. The only collection I can think of before that, like that, is Mario All-Stars. And even then, comparatively, All-Stars I think had more effort put into it because they had to redo all the sprites and such. Whereas the immediate change to Sonic Jam is minor difficulty stuff, but the only thing of real note added to it was that Sonic World, technically the first time Sonic was in 3D. Still not a bad collection. If you have I think that was a Saturn game, it's not a bad time. I recall some music emulation not being the best, though I might also be thinking of this one emulator disc out there I know is for the... Actually, I think that was for the Dreamcast that had basically every Genesis game on it. Either way, time for the Angel Island Act 2 boss fight, which is a bit harder as Knuckles because he can't get as many hits in at the start. Plus, I don't have Tails to potentially abuse in the case I was actually using Tails. This boss likes to go behind the waterfalls a way to avoid getting hit while also transporting himself from side to side, and it has two basic attacks aside from touch damage. He can fire fireballs straight down, which can usually burn down the bridge or just as a basic attack method, but he generally tends to aim them at an angle going along the floor so that you can just get damage more easily. And you probably noticed, but that wasn't Eggman in the Eggmobile. That was the Egg-Robot, an enemy that we saw in Sonic Campaign back in Sky Sanctuary Zone. As you saw in the beginning of the game, he's basically Knuckles' villain. In fact, he replaces Eggman in every Eggmobile through most of the game, with one exception just due to spriting stuff. More about that later. Welcome to highly contested pronunciation zone. It's either Hydrocity or Hydrocity, depending on who you talk to. I don't mind either, though I am of the mindset that prefers Hydrocity, just because I think it sounds cooler than Hydrocity. Now, this is the water level for Sonic 3 Knuckles on the whole. The water does make an appearance in a lot of other stages throughout the game. Quite a few, actually. In fact, that's probably because the game takes place on Angel Island, even though at this point, Angel Island is actually in the sky, because this does canonically take place after Sonic 3 and Knuckles' Sonic storyline, despite what the Sonic 4 website may have told you back in 2010 or whenever. This does take place after Sonic, so the island's already in midair again. We just are doing our own thing because Egg-Robo's causing some shit. Now, the thing is with this level is that, like many other Sonic water levels, you can very easily avoid the water, especially in Act 1, just by sticking to the high route. There's still going to be times where you have to go into it, but even then, this is far from the worst water level in the series. Labyrinth Zone is probably still one of the worst ones just due to Sonic 1's limitations. Though, in terms of the best water level, Aquatic Ruin might be my favorite out of that list, just because they keep a good balance of speed versus water there. Now, this has always just been one of my favorite special stage color palettes, even though, because I don't like creamsicles, but I like being reminded of creamsicles just because it's a fun word to say. Now, even though I'm not going for the perfects, boxing the giant grids of blue spheres is still the fastest way to clear the stage. Plus, it reduces the danger of a lot of stages just because you get rid of all those extra red spheres. And hey, that can be the difference between winning the special stage and losing, so might as well do it. Now, I actually really like how Mania handled Blue Sphere, because for those who haven't played Mania, that game has its own special stages. However, Blue Sphere replaces the special stages that you can reach at a checkpoint, and there's a set amount of maps. For the most part, you clear it just for rings or score and medals, but I do like how they handled cycling through them. For instance, getting a perfect gets you a gold medal, whereas just clearing it gets you a silver, I believe. And getting everything just feels so good with those Blue Sphere stages. Plus, they have a lot of really good, complicated layouts that require some actual thinking, and I love that. Now, one thing I don't like about Hydrocity Zone is getting the special rings as Knuckles, because the limitations on his jump that you have really screw you over in terms of some of the platforming here. Admittedly, they do a good job with one thing, though, in that there's plenty of walls that Knuckles can easily climb to traverse things that Sonic could do nothing about. I'll go into a special stage later. Get up there, get up there. Okay, we're good. Knuckles is still very prone to drowning, sadly, which is more or less just a game mechanic, because I think echidnas very similarly to hedgehogs, are actually pretty decent swimmers. I think I might be thinking of platypi, actually. I think I'm thinking of platypus. I don't think... Do echidnas swim? You know what? I'm gonna Google this. Do echidnas swim? Surprisingly, echidnas are good swimmers. So yeah, Yuji Naka, you failed us once again. I'm joking, of course. It was only his innocent mistake that actually made Sonic unable to swim. And hey, it works as a gameplay mechanic. Who cares if it's realistic or not? There's a certain suspension of disbelief you need to have when it comes to games. And time for our next special stage. This is why we're here for like 20 minutes compared to Angel Island's 10. I go through a lot of special stages here. And, well, admittedly, one thing I don't like about Blue Sphere compared to the Sonic 1 or 2 special stages is that I think it's a bit of a lengthy special stage comparatively. For instance, Sonic 1, you can probably be done with some of those special stages in like a minute at most. These can take upwards of 3 or 4 depending on the one, and that can be kind of distracting. I'm looking at one in particular later on. That is kind of an issue I think the 2D games had the farther they went on. Even Sonic Mania had this to an extent, is that the special stages, while they got more complicated and interesting as they went on, I think they also could get a bit too lengthy. I'll give Mania points because if you play those well, they're very short special stages, but if you don't, you could be in there for a bit. Still, 4 Chaos Emeralds this quickly is pretty nice pace. For Knuckles, at least. I want to say some of the routes with Knuckles just screw you out of a lot of special rings, which, to an extent, I can understand, because, canonically, Robotnik's been defeated, the Chaos Emeralds have scattered like the Dragon Balls probably again. It only makes sense that they'd be kind of harder to find this quickly, but at the same time, gameplay-wise, I find that to be an odd balance. Either way, this mini-boss actually gets a chance to do his thing this time around as Knuckles. He immediately starts dashing from side to side, and you cannot damage him until he lands on this pole. At which point, you just need to jump on him over and over again, and his main method of trying to kill you at this point is just spinning you around so that you might accidentally drown. However, a good spin dash is all you need to get out of here at this rate. And I think he has 1 HP left, damn it. Make sure, I guess one thing I can say about Knuckles, rather, is learn your momentum, because you're going to need, I think, the ability to jump off at certain points to have certain trajectories a lot more often as him. Also, given that some of his stages end at slightly different locations, I'm actually not as certain of some of the locations of items that the flag post can actually uncover. So that's a thing. Now, one thing that Sonic 3 Complete does that's a bit different from Sonic 3 and K on its own is level design changes, because there were some minor level design changes from Sonic 3 to Sonic and Knuckles. For instance, that spring in Sonic and Knuckles, and including Sonic 3 and K, was replaced by a life monitor. Here, though, it's a spring. I believe, for the most part, when it comes to the Sonic 3 stages that had minor changes in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, they stick with the Sonic 3 design mentalities. For instance, that spring being there instead of a 1-up. Some monitors still being Eggman monitors, I believe, later on, so on and so forth. It's an interesting combination of what they did, because they clearly didn't just port Sonic 3 and Knuckles into a ROM. It is very much seeming like they just outright combined Sonic 3 and Knuckles into a more distinctive package than just Sonic 3 Knuckles in a way. Because I'm interested in how they developed this one in particular, because I know there's also, there are various versions of the Sonic 3 Complete patch. In fact, there's one that even has a customization option, for instance, changing some sprites around to the Sonic 1 and 2 color palettes and such. There's a whole lot to Sonic 3 Complete that I just do not experiment with, and I love the efforts that developers went into with that. The Sonic ROM hacking community, when it gets really good, it gets really good. In fact, I watched the yearly Sonic hacking contest on a certain Johnny's channel, just because, first off, I love the dude to begin with, and secondly, I love the efforts that can be put into those games. Some of them are just memes, but hey, memes are often very harmless when it comes to games, at least. There are some that are just either plain annoying, dumb, or actually harmful, but those are farther between than these. Also, I love Hydrocity Act 2's theme. I know I've mentioned it time and time again, at least between me and my friends. I think I mentioned it a couple times in the original LP, to say the least. But Sonic 3's soundtrack is amazing, and I love how they went the extra effort to give each individual act a different sounding mix of the melody. Usually I'm more of a fan of the Act 2 just because they're a bit funkier, but on the whole, just great, great stuff. Now, the special ring we're heading up to right now is actually one that's kind of annoying to get to as Sonic, just because if you miss that jump, it's much harder to get up to, but thankfully Knuckles' climb makes getting to some of these rings quite a bit easier. And in terms of the special stages, for the most part, they are much easier when you're not going for the perfect, just because you can play them as much more freely as you can. Admittedly, not being in my perfect pattern actually makes some of the stages a bit more annoying for me to remember, just because I'm so set into perfecting them. But, on the whole, nothing too harmful. Admittedly, though, to show how ingrained getting hypers with these is for me, there was a collection of Sonics 1 through 3 and K, and I think maybe CD was in there, I forget. Sonic Classic Collection on Nintendo DS. I never owned that myself. Scott, who's been on the channel a couple times to say the least, did own it back in 8th grade. He might even still have it, actually. But he was not as good as Sonic as I was. To the point where he asked me if I could help him beat the games to an extent. And unintentionally, I got all the emeralds very easily in it, and I always found it kind of odd because he was like, "Why'd you do that? Like, the super mode ruins the game." And I'm like, "It's instinct, dude, I'm sorry." It's one of the more memorable gaming stories of my own to tell for some reason. Now, normally I would try to actually head up that path up there, but Knuckles cannot actually go up there, if I recall, just due to his lower jump, so we're stuck going this way. Now, something I've always found interesting about Knuckles in Sonic 3 on the whole is that if you compare his playable sprite to his NPC sprite when you're playing as Sonic, there are some differences. Namely, his red is a bit deeper and brighter here in playable mode, whereas the NPC is a bit paler, as well as, I think, a pixel taller for some reason. Just kind of a weird thing there. On the whole, Hydrocity, I think, is a harder stage than Angel Island as Knuckles. But it was like that as Sonic to begin with. It's more or less just due to the increased perilousness of the stage comparatively. And even then, Angel Island Act 2 as Knuckles can get pretty perilous given the amount of spikes. In fact, I will say, between Knuckles' own moveset and some of the changed level designs for Knuckles' paths, Knuckles is the harder playthrough of the two. In fact, no, I say he's the hardest out of the three, because Tails is basically Sonic, if a little bit easier in terms of getting around the stages given his flight ability. A bit harder the fact you can't get a super mode in Sonic 3 standalone as Tails, admittedly. In fact, you can't get a special mode for him until the second half of the game. Now, this is especially weird for me because I've actually rarely gone this direction. Usually when I'm playing as Sonic, I make it onto these platforms and reach the next special ring fairly easily. I actually had to go out of my way to get this one this time. I believe it's time for Special Stage Act 6? Or Special Stage 6, not Act 6. Yeah, this is one I admittedly screw up the execution of a little bit, because the pattern you're supposed to do, if I recall correctly, even for going for the perfect or more easily anything else, is constantly turning left every area, but I think I accidentally go right instead, which screws everything up. Admittedly, it's been a while at this point since I played 3 and K, since the original LP parts, actually. So at that point, it's probably been a year and a half plus, maybe? Let me look this up, actually. When did I do 3 and K? Playlists. It's definitely a few down, to say the least. That should be good. Sonic... CD, Blast, blah blah blah, there's the Game Gear games. There you are. Let's see, Part 1... May 24th, 2018. Really? That recently? It feels like it's been longer. Well, given my backlog, that means I probably recorded that around the summer of 2017. Huh. It feels like it's been longer. What the hell? Oh, actually, you know what? That might actually count me adding in the description, because some of you may have noticed, I'm very slow at adding playlist descriptions to my videos. So let's actually check the final upload date. Yeah, September 17th, 2016. Okay, that feels more accurate. Yeah, 2 years later. Okay. Oh. For a second, it felt like I'd maybe lived 2 years and like 5 months. That would be really weird. Either way, at this point, we're actually in an entirely new section of the stage. We're past where Knuckles pressed that switch, pushing Sonic down to where the boss fight was for Hydrocity Act 2. And now we got a little Knuckles-only exclusive section. Nothing too notable. They do make good use of Knuckles' abilities in his paths, though, especially the glide. They love having you use the glide. Hey, I won't complain about getting extra rings. They also love doing this little crusher sequence for some reason, even though it's not really that deadly. Now, the boss in Hydrocity Act 2, I played this very poorly, I openly admit. Because since it had been a while since I played 3, and even then by this point I usually have Supersonic, it had been so long since I actually fought this guy normally that I forgot how to fight him to an extent. I remembered he had to jump onto the little whirlpool he drags up to him, and then jump into him from there, but I forgot the most important part of this fight, that the water jets that the grenades make can push you up into him, causing damage to him. So, yeah, we're here for like another 2 minutes, and I apologize for that. The long way of this fight is really slow. I do not recommend doing it. Jump on the water jets. And even then, in the case I would have Super Knuckles, that wouldn't help me as much still, because Super Knuckles, I think, still jumps slower than Supersonic should you have it. I do appreciate some of the efforts, though, that they went to making some of the bosses a bit harder as Knuckles. Between his own abilities and just the way that the bosses work to begin with, some of them are quite a bit harder as Knuckles. Where there are boss fights, more on that later, but we'll see about that. Admittedly, again, part of the reason that this campaign comes off as a bit harder for me this playthrough is just due to my own stupidity, because it had been so long. I really actually probably should have practiced this run because of how different it is from Sonic. But, it's in the past already. It's just run with what we got. I do think that out of all of the water stages that Sonic has had through his history, that this is one of the harder water stage boss fights. At least in terms of concept. Because Labyrinth Zone's boss fight was barely a boss fight, really. Aquatic Ruin, pretty simple. This is pretty simple. I forget what the water stage's CD was. Tidal Tempest, simple. In fact, it's one of my favorite bosses in CD. Mania, the one there was pretty easy. On the whole, water boss, stage bosses tend to be on the easier side of things on the whole. Chemical Plant as well, I guess you could count as water level. This is always just one of the harder ones, and I really should have gotten shot up by that water jet. That's weird. But yeah, on the second run, I remembered, so yeah, this is a lot easier. If only I had remembered that from the start, we would have been done 2 minutes ago. Either way, that's Hydrocity Zone. As Knuckles has its annoyances between some of the jump physics he has, and the boss is just my own stupidity there. But on the whole, not too bad. It's still an early game stage. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we'll be heading into Marble Garden and seeing what awaits us there as Knuckles. See you guys then.